Commander Zethka adjusted his environmental suit as he stepped aboard the human vessel Defiance. The ship's corridors were cramped by Kralian standards, forcing his tall frame to duck beneath doorways designed for these smaller beings. Everything about human construction seemed backwards to him: low ceilings, narrow passages, and lighting that flickered with an almost aggressive intensity. "Welcome aboard, Commander." The voice belonged to Captain Sarah Chun, a compact woman with dark hair pulled back severely. Her uniform bore the scars of countless battles, and her eyes held a coldness that Zethka found unsettling. "I trust your quarters are adequate?" "They will suffice," Zethka replied, his translator converting his harmonic speech patterns into the rough human language. "Though I must ask, why are your ships built so defensively?" Captain Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Space is dangerous, Commander. We build our ships to survive what's out there." Zethka nodded politely, though privately he wondered what these humans could possibly know about danger. The Kralian Empire had explored the galaxy for millennia before humans had even discovered fire. They had faced the Void Seekers, survived the Crystal Wars, and emerged victorious from conflicts that had destroyed entire civilizations. Now the Galactic Council had assigned these newcomers as allies in the campaign against the Nexus Horde, a decision that baffled every Kralian military strategist. Humans had only achieved faster than light travel 200 years ago. Their technology was primitive, their ships small and fragile-looking, yet somehow they had earned a place in this critical mission. Zethka suspected it was mere politics, the Council's attempt to give the newcomers experience before relegating them to safer duties. "Your crew seems young," Zethka observed as they walked through the ship. Most of the humans he saw appeared barely past their species' maturity. In Kralian culture, military command required centuries of experience. "Young and eager," Chun agreed. "Most of my people have been fighting since they could hold a weapon. We've had to grow up fast." The statement puzzled Zethka. Human space was relatively peaceful, with only minor border skirmishes against pirates and raiders. What could they possibly mean by fighting since childhood? He decided to attribute it to typical human exaggeration. They reached the bridge, where Zethka was introduced to the senior staff. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, the tactical officer, looked barely older than a Kralian adolescent. Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez appeared even younger, her hands stained with lubricants from whatever primitive maintenance human ships required. The communications officer, Ensign Kim Patel, couldn't have been more than 30 standard years old. "Commander Zethka will be observing our operations," Captain Chun announced to her crew. "His expertise will be invaluable as we approach the Nexus positions." Zethka appreciated the diplomatic courtesy, though he doubted these humans would truly value Kralian tactical doctrine. Their battle records showed a concerning tendency toward direct confrontation rather than the elegant strategies his people had perfected over millennia. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Webb reported from his station, "long-range sensors are detecting Nexus fleet movements in the Kepler 442 system. Looks like a full battle group: 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and at least 60 fighter squadrons." Chun nodded grimly. "Estimated arrival time at their current course and speed?" 18 hours, ma'am." Zethka studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Nexus forces significantly outnumbered the Allied fleet. Standard Kralian doctrine would recommend strategic withdrawal to a more defensible position, perhaps near the asteroid fields of the Rigel system, where their superior shields could provide advantage. "Captain," he said carefully, "perhaps we should consider repositioning. The Nexus forces have numerical superiority and—" "Commander," Chun interrupted, her voice carrying an odd note of amusement, "have you ever fought the Nexus before?" "Well, no, Zethka admitted. This will be my first direct engagement with them. However, Kralian strategic analysis suggests—" "Strategic analysis is useful," Chun said, turning to face him fully. "But sometimes you need to get your hands dirty to really understand an enemy." There was something in her tone that made Zethka uncomfortable, though he couldn't identify exactly what. It reminded him of the way apex predators on Crowley spoke just before striking. "Ma'am," Ensign Patel called out. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Morrison aboard the Yorktown. Put him through." The holographic display flickered to life, showing a grizzled human with gray hair and numerous scars across his weathered face. Admiral Morrison looked like he had been fighting wars for longer than most species had been spacefaring. "Sarah," the Admiral said without preamble, "we've got new intelligence on the Nexus positions. They're using the moons of Kepler 442c as staging areas. Looks like they're planning something big." "How big?" Chun asked. "Full-scale invasion of the Centauri colonies? If they break through here, they'll have a clear path to Earth itself." Zethka noticed something shift in the bridge atmosphere. The casual efficiency he had observed transformed into something harder, more focused. The young crew members suddenly looked older, their movements precise and purposeful. "Understood, Admiral," Chun replied. "What are our orders?" "Stop them, by any means necessary." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Zethka waited for Chun to begin planning their strategic withdrawal or perhaps call for reinforcements from the Kralian Second Fleet. Instead, she turned to her tactical officer. "Marcus, I want firing solutions for every Nexus ship in that system." "Rosa, how's our reactor output?" "Running hot and clean, Captain," Martinez replied. "We can push her harder if needed." "Good. Kim, send a message to all ships in the fleet. Tell them we're going hunting." Zethka stared at the humans in disbelief. "Captain, surely you don't intend to engage such superior numbers directly?" "Basic tactical doctrine suggests—" "Commander," Chun said, her voice suddenly cold as space itself, "you're about to learn something about human tactical doctrine. We don't retreat when Earth is threatened." The way she said Earth made Zethka's skin crawl. There was something primal in her tone, something that spoke of absolute commitment to violence. He had heard similar sounds from the great predators of Crowleys when defending their young. "Begin preparations for jump to the Kepler system," Chun ordered. "All hands battle stations." Alarms began sounding throughout the ship, but they weren't the panicked klaxons Zethka expected. Instead, the rhythm was steady, almost musical. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their earlier casual demeanor replaced by something that made Zethka's instincts scream danger warnings. "Captain," he tried again, "the numerical disadvantage is overwhelming, even with Kralian support ships." "Commander," Chun interrupted, and when she looked at him, Zethka saw something in her eyes that froze his blood. "You're thinking like prey?" "We're not." As the Defiance prepared for its jump to what seemed like certain destruction, Zethka found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about these strange newcomers to the galaxy. The humans around him showed no fear, no hesitation in the face of overwhelming odds. Instead, they seemed eager, for the first time in his long military career. Commander Zethka wondered if perhaps the Galactic Council hadn't assigned humans as allies to gain experience. Perhaps they had assigned the humans to teach the galaxy what war really meant. The ship shuddered as it entered hyperspace, carrying them toward a battle that would either end in glorious victory or spectacular destruction. As Zethka watched the human crew prepare for combat, he realized that in their minds, those two outcomes might be exactly the same thing, and that thought terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace directly into chaos. The Kepler 442 system blazed with weapons fire as Nexus and allied ships clashed in deadly ballet across the void. Zethka gripped his observation station as the ship immediately began evasive maneuvers that would have torn a Kralian vessel apart. Multiple contacts bearing 27 Mark IV. Lieutenant Commander Webb called out, his fingers dancing across tactical displays. "Nexus destroyer squadron moving to intercept." Captain Chun stood at the center of the bridge, perfectly calm despite the madness surrounding them. "Rosa, give me everything the reactor's got." "Kim, patch me through to the fleet." "You're connected, Captain." Chun's voice carried across the fleet channels with absolute authority. "All ships, this is Defiance. Execute pattern Chaos 7. Repeat, Pattern Chaos 7? Zeth-Ka had never heard of Pattern Chaos 7, but the response was immediate. Human ships throughout the fleet suddenly broke formation and scattered in what appeared to be completely random directions. To his trained eye, it looked like panic, like the fleet was disintegrating under pressure. "Captain," he said urgently, "your ships are breaking formation. Without coordinated defensive screens, the Nexus will destroy them individually." His words died as he watched the tactical display. The seemingly random scatter pattern placed human ships at precise angles around Nexus formations. What had appeared to be panic was actually the most complex tactical maneuver Zeth-Ka had ever witnessed, executed with split-second timing across dozens of vessels. "Fire!" Chun commanded. The universe exploded into light. Human ships opened fire from 12 different vectors simultaneously, their weapons targeting not the heavily armored fronts of Nexus ships, but the vulnerable joints between armor sections. The Nexus formation, designed to repel direct assault, found itself caught in a crossfire that struck every weak point at once. 3 Nexus destroyers died in the first volley. "Nexus heavy cruiser dominance is turning to engage us directly," Webb reported. "She's got 6 destroyers as escorts," Zeth-Ka calculated quickly. 7 enemy ships against 1. Even with the Defiance's apparent capabilities, the mathematics were impossible. "Captain, we need to withdraw and rejoin the fleet formation." "Negative," Chun said, and there was something in her smile that made Zeth-Ka's blood run cold. "Marcus, give me a torpedo spread. Target their reactor signatures." "Ma'am, at this range, torpedo targeting is nearly impossible. The probability of successful hits is less than 12%. Then we'll have to get closer." The Defiance suddenly accelerated directly toward the Nexus formation. Zeth-Ka watched in horror as they charged straight into the teeth of 7 enemy ships, their weapons blazing. It was suicide. No rational military commander would order such an attack, but as they closed distance, something impossible happened. The human ship's targeting became more accurate, not less. Torpedo after torpedo found its mark, exploiting the brief windows when Nexus point defenses cycled between targets. The closer they got to certain death, the more deadly the humans became. "How?" Zeth-Ka whispered, watching the tactical display with fascination and terror. "How are they compensating for targeting drift at this range?" Chief Engineer Martinez looked up from her station with a grin that belonged on a predator. "We're not compensating, Commander. We're getting close enough that drift doesn't matter." It was insane. It was brilliant. It was completely contrary to everything Zeth-Ka had learned about space combat in 3 centuries of military service. And it was working. The lead Nexus destroyer exploded as human torpedoes overwhelmed its shields and tore into its reactor core. The ship's death throes created a debris field that forced the other Nexus vessels to alter course, breaking their formation just enough for human fighters to exploit the gaps. "Enemy cruiser is launching boarding pods," Webb announced. 12 pods inbound. Zeth-Ka felt a moment of relief. Finally, something that made sense. Boarding actions followed established protocols. The humans would retreat to defensible positions, set up overlapping fields of fire, and hold choke points until the enemy could be repelled or reinforcements arrived. Captain Chun had different ideas. "All hands. Prepare to repel boarders," she announced over the ship's communications. "Remember, people, they're not trapped in here with us. We're trapped in here with them." The way she said it sent ice through Zeth-Ka's veins. There was anticipation in her voice, as if the prospect of enemy soldiers aboard her ship was something she had been hoping for. The boarding pods struck the hull with metallic crashes that echoed through the ship. Zeth-Ka accessed the internal security feeds, expecting to see human crew members falling back to prepared positions. Instead, he watched something that defied belief. The humans advanced toward the breach points, Nexus troops, each standing nearly 3 meters tall and armed with plasma weapons, found themselves facing human defenders who should have been cowering behind barricades. Instead, these smaller beings moved with fluid precision, using the ship's own corridors as weapons. They turned corners into kill zones, transformed maintenance shafts into ambush points, and used their intimate knowledge of their vessel's layout to devastating Effect.zeth-Ka watched a human engineer barely reaching the chest of her opponents disable. 3 Nexus warriors using nothing but maintenance tools and an understanding of which bulkheads would channel explosive decompression. He saw a communications specialist turn the ship's own internal sensors into a targeting system that guided improvised explosives with surgical precision. "Commander," Captain Chun said, appearing beside him as if from nowhere, "you might want to see this." She led him to an observation deck where they could watch the space battle directly. The human fleet had abandoned all pretense of traditional formation fighting. Instead, they moved like pack hunters, coordinating attacks through some invisible communication network that allowed them to strike with perfect timing. A Nexus heavy cruiser found itself surrounded by 6 human destroyers, each one smaller and supposedly weaker. But the humans attacked simultaneously from different angles, their weapons targeting the same structural weak points in a sequence that created cascading failures throughout the enemy ship. It was like watching a pride of lions bring down prey 10 times their individual size. "Your species fights like predators," Zethka said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. "We fight like humans," Chun corrected. "There's a difference." On the tactical display, Zethka could see the Nexus forces beginning to falter. Their rigid formation doctrine, perfected over centuries of conquest, was useless against opponents who refused to follow any recognizable pattern. Every time the Nexus adapted to human tactics, the humans changed them again. "Captain," Webb called out, "enemy flagship is requesting communication." "Put them through." The holographic display showed a towering Nexus commander, his chitinous armor marked with the scars of countless battles. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute conquest. "Human vessel, this is War Leader Thax of the Nexus Horde. Your resistance is admirable but futile. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Captain Chun stepped forward, and Zethka saw her transformation. Gone was any pretense of civilization. What stood before the alien conqueror was something primal and terrifying. "War Leader Thax," she said, her voice carrying across space with quiet menace. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You have threatened Earth. You have killed our people. And now you're going to learn why that was a mistake." She cut the transmission without waiting for a response. "All ships," she broadcast to the human fleet, "new target priority." "I want that flagship." Zethka watched in fascination and growing horror as the entire human fleet suddenly focused on a single target. Ships that had been engaged across the system disengaged from their current battles and converged on the Nexus flagship with single-minded determination. They ignored the other enemy vessels, accepting damage from multiple directions in their rush to reach their new prey. It should have been a disaster, exposing themselves to concentrated fire from multiple enemies while focusing on a single target violated every principle of fleet tactics. But Zethka was beginning to understand that humans didn't follow principles. They followed instincts. And their instincts told them to eliminate the Alpha Predator first. The Nexus flagship, designed to command from the safety of the fleet's center, suddenly found itself the focus of an entire species' rage. Human ships swarmed around it like antibodies attacking a virus, each one willing to sacrifice itself to ensure the target's destruction. The massive vessel's shields failed under the concentrated assault. Its armor buckled under weapons fire from a dozen different angles. And as it began to die, Zethka heard something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The humans were laughing, not with joy or relief, but with the savage satisfaction of predators claiming their kill. It was a sound that spoke of millions of years of evolution, of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its world's food chain, and never forgotten what that required. As the Nexus flagship exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire system, Zethka realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare had been wrong. The humans hadn't won through superior technology or numbers. They had won because they fought like the apex predators they had always. 3 days after the battle at Kepler 442, Commander Zethka stood in the Defiance's war room, staring at intelligence reports that made his hands shake. The Nexus weren't retreating. They were regrouping. And they were bringing everything they had. 47 battle groups. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the holographic display. Nearly 2,000 ships, including their Emperor-class dreadnoughts. Intelligence suggests they're planning to bypass our defensive lines entirely and strike directly at Earth. Captain Chun studied the tactical projections with the same calm intensity she brought to everything. Around the table, her senior staff maintained their characteristic quiet confidence, but Zethka could sense something different in the air. This wasn't just another battle. This was everything. Travel time to Earth at their current speed? Chun asked. 68 hours, Lieutenant Commander Webb replied. Our fastest ships could reach Earth in 42 hours if we departed immediately. Defensive capabilities at Earth? Orbital platforms, the home fleet, and civilian evacuation protocols, Admiral Morrison said grimly. Against 47 battle groups? It won't be enough. Zethka had run the calculations himself. The mathematics were brutal. Even with the human fleet's unconventional tactics, the numerical disparity was too great. The rational choice was obvious. Establish defensive positions in deep space, conduct a fighting retreat, and hope to inflict enough casualties to make the Nexus reconsider their assault. Admiral, Chun said quietly, request permission to take the fleet directly to Nexus space. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zethka stared at the human captain, wondering if combat stress had finally broken her mind. Captain, that would leave Earth completely undefended. Even if we could somehow damage their production facilities, we're not going after their factories. Commander, Chun said, and her smile was the most terrifying thing Zethka had ever seen. We're going after their home. Admiral Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his scarred face thoughtful. Sarah, what you're suggesting would require the entire fleet. Every ship, every crew member. And the chances of any of us surviving long enough to reach their homeworld are irrelevant, Chun finished. They want to attack Earth? Fine, let them explain to their people why their home is burning while their fleet is light years away. The strategy was insane. It was brutal. It was completely contrary to every accepted principle of defensive warfare. And as Zethka looked around the table, he realized that every human in the room was nodding in agreement. The logistics alone, Zethka protested. Nexus space is heavily fortified. Their homeworld is protected by defense grids that have never been breached. The political ramifications of attacking civilian targets, Commander, Chun said, turning to face him directly, you still don't understand what you're looking at, do you? I don't follow. You keep thinking we're soldiers. We're not. She gestured to her crew, to the holographic display showing human ships throughout the fleet. We're not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. We're fighting for survival. And when humans fight for survival, there are no rules. Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. All fleet commanders are to receive sealed orders within the hour. Tell them to say goodbye to their families. This is a one-way mission. As the briefing dispersed, Zethka found himself alone with Captain Chun. The war room felt smaller somehow, oppressive with the weight of what had been decided. You're planning genocide? He said quietly. No, Chun replied, her voice steady. We're planning to end a war. The Nexus have conquered 17 civilizations over the past 3 centuries. They've enslaved entire species, turned living worlds into industrial platforms. They understand only one language, absolute force. But the civilians will survive if their government surrenders unconditionally. Chun's eyes held no mercy, no uncertainty. This isn't about killing, Commander. It's about teaching the galaxy that some lines should never be crossed. 12 hours later, the human fleet departed for Nexus space. 63 ships carrying the hopes and fury of an entire species. As they entered hyperspace, Zethka monitored communications from Earth. The planet wasn't being evacuated. Instead, every human colony, every orbital station, Every deep space installation was broadcasting the same message on all frequencies. It was a recording of Captain Chun, standing on the bridge of the Defiance. "People of the Nexus Horde," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute conviction. "Your fleet is currently en route to attack our homeworld. We want you to know that this message is being transmitted as our fleet enters your space. By the time you receive this, we will have already begun our response to your aggression." The camera pulled back to show the tactical display behind her, revealing the full scope of the human fleet's target. "You have 12 hours to recall your forces and submit to unconditional surrender. If your fleet is not turned around within that time, we will demonstrate why attacking Earth was the worst mistake in your species' history." The transmission ended with coordinates not of military targets, but of the Nexus homeworld itself, as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Nexus space. Zethka witnessed something that redefined his understanding of warfare. The humans didn't attack military installations first. They didn't target defensive platforms or fleet bases. Instead, they made a direct course for the most heavily defended system in Nexus space. They were going home. And they were making sure everyone knew it. "Massive defensive fleet responding," Webb reported as proximity alarms screamed throughout the ship. "Estimated 600 vessels moving to intercept." "Time to target?" Chun asked. 14 minutes at current speed." Zethka watched the tactical display in fascination and horror. 600 ships against 63. The humans would be obliterated long before they reached their target. Yet the fleet maintained course, accelerating directly into the teeth of an impossible defense. "Captain," he said desperately, "this is suicide. Even if you reach the planet, the defensive grids will—" "Commander," Chun interrupted, "what do you know about human history?" The question caught him off guard. "Some basics from the cultural briefings. You had various conflicts on your homeworld before achieving spaceflight." "We had wars," Chun corrected. "Endless, brutal wars that killed hundreds of millions of our people. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We came within minutes of ending our own civilization multiple times." Around them, the ship shuddered as Nexus weapons began finding their range. The human fleet was taking devastating casualties, but they kept coming. "Do you know what we learned from all that killing?" Chun asked, her voice unnaturally calm as destruction raged around them. "We learned that sometimes the only way to end a war is to make it so terrible that no one ever wants to fight another one." The Defiance shook as a direct hit penetrated their shields. Emergency lighting bathed the bridge in red, but the crew continued their duties with mechanical precision. They were professional. They were efficient. And they were completely without fear. "Multiple breaches on decks 7 through 12, Martinez reported. "Reactor at 97%. Can we maintain course?" "Yes, ma'am." Through the observation deck, Zethka could see human ships dying. The sleek destroyer Retribution exploded in a ball of fire that lit up half the system. The carrier Independence lost its entire flight deck to Nexus plasma cannons, but kept firing its remaining weapons until its reactor went critical. But for every human ship that died, they took Nexus vessels with them. More importantly, they kept broadcasting. "This is Captain Williams of the Constitution," came one transmission as the heavy cruiser's hull began venting atmosphere. "We are 30 seconds from reactor overload. To any Nexus ships in range, remember this moment. Remember that we came to your home. Remember that we chose to die here rather than let you reach ours. The ship exploded, taking 2 Nexus destroyers with it. This is Lieutenant Commander Park of the Soul. We've lost main power and life support. But we're still here. We're still coming. And when we die, someone else will take our place. Another ship. Another sacrifice. Another message burned into Nexus communications networks. As the remnants of the human fleet finally reached the Nexus homeworld's orbital defense grid, Zethka realized what he was witnessing. The humans weren't trying to destroy the planet. They were trying to prove a point. Every ship that died transmitted the same message. We can reach you. We can come to your homes. We can make you feel the fear you've been spreading across the galaxy, the orbital platforms. Each one larger than most human ships, opened fire with weapons that could crack moons. The Defiance and 6 other surviving vessels accelerated directly into the maelstrom. "Captain," Webb called out, "we've lost main shields. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We have maybe 2 minutes before we reach firing range of the surface," Chun finished. "All ships, this is Defiance. Execute final protocol." Zethka watched as the surviving human ships entered the atmosphere of the Nexus homeworld. They weren't targeting cities or civilian populations. Instead, they aimed for empty areas, deserts, oceans, unpopulated mountain ranges. As each ship died, it carved a line of fire across the planet's surface. Visible from orbit, the message was simple and terrible: we were here. We could have killed.